So, anyway, we got 3 institutes in Northern School. Obviously, Developmental Mo and then Heterogeneity.
Are you? Okay, so I'm going to
center as well that's built by companies.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and get started. I just wanted to start off with a couple of announcements. When we were in the when I was contacting all of you and sending you some of the organizing emails, we talked a little bit about products of this, and one very simple product of this is that you'll notice that all of your talks are being videotaped, and we referred all of you to the Evolution Institute website where the presentations are posted from the last workshop. So I believe we were explicit about this, but we would hope to do is actually, we're videotaping all of these for the purpose of posting them on the web again. So we would do that unless anyone doesn't want to give us permission to do that. We're hoping to post these so that the world can have some record or see what's gone on here. In addition, we handed you out this copy of the Florida Humanist Journal, and you might have noticed that this Florida Humanist Journal was actually a transcription of the presentations from the last workshop. So in addition to posting your presentation on the web, with your permission, we would like to send, we're making a tape recording of this, we'd like to send a transcription, we'd like to get it transcribed and, publish it in the Florida Humanist Journal. Of course, before it gets published, it gets sent to you and you edit what's, you edit what's said. So as well, so everyone, again, unless someone doesn't want us to do that, we'd like to have that as a product. Probably together, the Florida Humanist Journal is, is a physical journal, so it's not that it's not available on the web. So something we might do this time is that if we make transcriptions of your speeches, we would probably have those as PDFs as well, which people could, when they go to the EI website, they could click on the transcription as well as actually seeing the presentation. Okay, so one important point about this: did anyone not load? Did anyone not put their PowerPoint on one of these two computers? Did anyone use their own computer? What's that? Do you have Mark's? No, you don't have Mark's. Okay. Okay, so Mark, if you don't mind, if you could load yours on one of these computers so we can,
I can go at lunch, maybe enjoy that.
Okay.
Or Monday, or it's easy.
Yeah.
Are we gonna be here Monday?
Well, we'll be at the Marriott on Monday, but we'll have a computer. We can do it. Okay, so carrying on our session today, we have 2 sessions today, as all of you hopefully have seen in the schedule. We have one on evolutionary perspectives on bullying and power and peer relationships. I noticed that some of you have a yellow copy of the schedule. Some of you have a white copy, is that right? Well, hopefully the white copy is the most up-to-date with all the titles in the right order. So our first so we have 2 speakers this morning. We have Patricia Hawley. I believe I just pronounced her name wrong. It's really Hawley. Thank you. I always, in any case, who's going to talk about reconceptualizing pro-social, antisocial behavior from an evolutionary perspective, and then Anthony Volk is going to talk about the evolution and history of bullying. So we're going to start off with Ken.
Good morning. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm going to be talking about my work on aggression and social competence in children from this evolutionary perspective. And what I'm going to start doing is introduce you to my views on pro-sociality and anti-sociality, and then compare them to the traditional approaches to anti-sociality and pro-sociality we find in the psychological literature. And I'm going to show you why traditional views can't be right all the time, and how a reconceptualization of social dominance or power might be helpful to explain some of the situations where the traditional views aren't right. And then I'm going to end with some musings on the nature of human social competence. So first, I want to go back over 100 years to original conceptions of evolution, where the original authors, like we all know, we all understand in the room, the evolutionists, that phenomenologically dissimilar behaviors can be functionally similar. And we saw this in the work of Peter Kropotkin in 1902 in his book Mutual Aid, and the words that were used by Huxley in looking at evolution in terms of mutual struggle.
Now, what Kropotkin's point was is that cooperation is as much a part of human nature as competition is. And it has been naturally selected for in certain environments. And so if we look at these two broad approaches to evolution, we could think of them giving rise to different classes of behavior in human societies, pro-sociality and anti-sociality. And then we can think about them also in terms of the traits that they give rise to, sociability and aggressiveness in humans. But also from this perspective, we can point to these broad classes of behavior having a similar function in terms of evolutionary advantage. And by function here, I'm going to be talking about access to material resources. Other people have talked about access to mates. Now, in psychology, of course, we spend most of our time talking about prosociality and sociability, but of course, the evolutionists, we dip down into the ultimate level in terms of the function of those behaviors. So what this perspective is predicated on is the understanding that the social group mediates access to resources. And if you have goals, material goals, you need to get through the group to get those. And there are different strategies that you can use to do that. You could go through the group and use socially acceptable strategies, pro-sociality, or you can go around the group, go straight for the resources, or bump up against the group and go straight for the resources. We can think of this in terms of this pro-social avenue, in terms of recognizing that goal attainment is best achieved when you achieve those goals according to the norms of the social group. And these behaviors might include things like cooperation, reciprocation, alliances, friendship formations, and so on. G.C. Williams recognized the importance of this path, and he said in his book, his 1966 book, an individual who maximizes his friendships and minimizes his antagonisms will have an evolutionary advantage, and selection should favor those characteristics that promote optimization of these personal relationships. So this is what I base this work on in terms of children. But also recognize that this approach in looking at these two phenomenologically distinct classes funneling down into the same function really confronts traditional perspectives, because traditional perspectives really have anti-sociality on the one side and pro-sociality on the other. That pro-sociality was named to connote this oppositiveness, in 1978, by the way, to anti-sociality. So when you have your relationships portrayed like this, you expect a strong negative correlation between anti-sociality and pro-sociality, since they are opposites. But if you take a functional view, you don't see that at all. Is that if the function is common under pro-sociality and anti-sociality, you would either expect these two classes of behavior either to be independent or positively correlated. And in my work, I suggest that they would be positively correlated, which is quite in contrast to traditional perspectives. I don't tend to use the word anti-sociality, by the way. I'm going to start using the word coercion. Now, traditional models also link very well with conventional wisdom. We heard this talked about yesterday, is that all these good things, like morality, I'm going to use morality as an example, are positively associated with these good things, and then these good things lead to this good stuff. But if you don't have this good stuff, it's associated with aggression, and aggression is negatively related to peer regard. That's the conventional model. And these reflect some core assumptions in developmental circles, that the pro-sociality and morality are good because they lead to positive outcomes, and aggression is bad for kids because it's a risk behavior. At risk for what? Risk for negative developmental outcomes. And strangely, this core assumption in developmental circles has a strange bedfellow in some recent evolutionary approaches to morality that Fair and Fishbacher also suggest selfish types do not flourish because they are sanctioned. Right here, that's the sanctioning. But this is confronted by some reality that's been emerging in the last, from the late 1990s, that aggressive youths are not all the same. And many of them show social skills. They're socially central, they're liked, they're popular, and they can be not only effective, but socially successful. And this was reflected in the edited volume of myself and colleagues, Aggression and Adaptation. Now, the theory that I use evolutionary theory as my meta theory. The theory that I employ most directly is my own resource control theory. I've been speaking about this for 10 years now. And it's predicated on some very light assumptions about the evolution of human social groups that are very non-controversial. The social groups facilitate access to resources. We heard this yesterday in Carol's talk, and that competition then is also unavoidable under most conditions. And so what's interesting about this is that we have a challenge to be a good group member while maximizing our access to resources. Now, this is not a new perspective. We've seen a lot about this tension in human nature for a century of psychology. Freud talked about it, McDougall talked about it, James talked about it, Bakken talked about it in The Duality of Human Existence. But from this perspective, we might construe competence as a balance of getting along and getting ahead. And this is what I think that I would agree with Mark and Carol about. This is the social brain that's evolved. So getting ahead has typically been construed as social dominance in the zoological, primatological, and psychological literature. And here's getting ahead from the traditional perspective, is that the predominant perspective still focuses on aggression with impunity, agonistic contests. This is very clear in the literature. But I revise that approach. I think about getting ahead or social dominance in terms of access to resources. So what I've done is, what the zoological literature has done is looked at the form of the behavior, put that up front, and then talked about the function secondarily. Look, aggression, agonism, contests, resources. I switched that. Let's do a functional approach. I think that's more evolutionarily defensible. Bring the function up front, push the strategies back, and then you see that multiple strategies can arise in social groups. These are my inspirations. You can't see that. That's a social group of Asian elephants where I did my doctoral work on. So these strategies may be subtle and they may be sophisticated. So let's talk about two general classes of strategies, direct ones, coercion. There's your zoological agonistic contesty sort of stuff. Big literature on this. But this is another one that I proposed in 1999, pro-social strategies. The strategies that we use that foster cooperative, resource-yielding relationships, reciprocation, helping, ingratiation. And this is also, Carol mentioned, reciprocity builds social capital. And that's in effect what I'm talking about, is building this social capital. So when you construe these classes of resource strategy in this way, that they are either independent or positively associated, you can measure them independently. Imagine, if you will, kind of a normal curve there and a normal curve here. So I can go in a social group and measure the degree to which each individual employs each type of strategies. I can do this observationally, I can do it by self-report, I've done it by peer nomination, teacher report, etc. And you can see these things in social groups. So if you endorse items like, yeah, I get what I want by making threats, by manipulation, you're high on coercive control. And if you are low on pro-social strategies, that you're low on items like I reciprocate, I forge alliances, I return favors to get what I want. If you're high on coercive control and low on pro-social control, you are a coercive controller. If you predominantly use pro-social strategies, you use competently the mediation effect of the social group, you use cooperation and reciprocation predominantly, you're a pro-social controller. Most of us are average. We're somewhere in the middle. We kind of go back and forth. Some people use no strategies to control resources. These are non-controllers. There's a very interesting group right here that's drawn the most attention in my work. These, what I call bi-strategic. Bi-strategic because they use, to a high degree, both types of strategy. So, from the zoological perspective, here are your social dominants, agonistic contests. But from my perspective, these are all social dominants because they are all successfully controlling resources, the definition of social dominance. So here I have both my theoretical model matching my measurement model. These guys, they've proven time and time again to be the most effective at controlling resources across all age groups. So these are, in my parlance, the most highly socially dominant of all subtypes. Now, to confront some conventional wisdoms about competition, this perspective actually invites a gender similarity perspective. That is, I have no reason to believe that resources are any less important to females than they are to males. And by the way, what we've learned in developmental circles over the last 15 years, thank you very much, females can be very aggressive. It might not look magnificent in terms of tusks and manes and claws, but it is very effective. And Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy talked about it's actually the females that control the political actions of social group for the long term because it lasts several generations. Male's power is fleeting. Also, this is not particular to adolescents. I'm not referring to anyone in this room. I'm talking elephants, I'm talking lions, so don't even get upset. This is not particular to adolescents. I hear time and time again, adolescent social dominance and status thriving is important. It's actually important also to toddlers, children under the age of 3, and I have good reason to believe this because I actually have data that have shown this. It matters to them. They know the rank of the individual who's sitting across from them, and it changes their behavior already by the age of 3 years. And I propose that these relationships are a very important shaper of personality. So I'm an evolution by individual differences sort of girl. And so David Buss and I are editing the first volume on the evolution of individual differences in personality, due out in 2010. So what I'm going to be doing is comparing my perspective, which is called a person-centered approach. A person-centered approach because I look at the confluence of two theoretically important variables on how they speak to types of individuals whom I'm going to be comparing. And I'm going to be comparing this to that variable-centered approach, which is the predominant approach in the psychological literature, where we look at correlations and regressions. So for example, if we were to already look at, look at this, the variable-centered approach to the reality of how morality operates in social groups. These are data based on children under the age of 6. What we see already, I'm not going to define all these for you, it's not important, but what we see already is that this relationship is very complex. We see some aspects of morality to be positively associated with aggression, while other aspects of morality are actually negatively associated with aggression. This is expected from the traditional perspective. I would expect this from my perspective because I see morality as a social tool. And here's how we can make sense of that if you're scratching your head. Well, how can that be? It's because these types of individuals, bi-strategics, pro-social controllers, coercive controllers, typical controllers, and non-controllers, all standardized to a mean of 0. If it's above the line, they're above average in the social group. If it's below the line, they're below average in the social group. Okay? So we have all the social dominants are very high on moral cognition, and our non-controllers haven't a clue what's going on. Here is where our pro-socials and our bi-strategics start to bifurcate. We have empathy, internalization of rules, and we have no guilt or internalization of the coercive controllers and the bi-strategics. So they look a lot alike. But here again, we have the bi-strategics and the coercive controllers start to bifurcate again on behavior, on apologizing and reparations in the social group. That is, the coercive controllers aren't doing it. The pro-social controllers are doing it all the time, model citizens, okay? And the bi-strategics are no different from everybody else. So they know what's going on. They're not necessarily internalizing, but they do know how to operate and cover their tracks in the social group. This is what I mean by morality as a social tool. And if we look at...
Is this classification, is this based on teacher ratings of kids?
I do it all different ways. This one happens to be teacher ratings of kids. And these other measures were based on both teacher ratings and performance in a child interview. So if we look at the relationship with aggression, we see what I have found for 10 years, no correlation between aggression and social preference. Now, just to be clear about what no relationship means, this means that I cannot predict the degree to which a child is liked in the social group based on how aggressive that child is. And again, social prominence is associated positively with aggression. So we actually have a positive relationship there. How can we make sense of this? Again, turn to the person-centered approach. It's because of our bi-strategics. They are very socially prominent in the group. They're very aggressive, by the way, and they're liked. This is what sends reverberations through the developmental circles, is that children are already liking these. And what's also interesting as a side note, these kids are under 5. And so they're already making character assessments, comparing these kids to these kids. We like bi-strategics. We don't like coercive controllers. We don't like non-controllers. So what this perspective has shown is that we've replicated what we expect in the developmental literature. There are your incompetent, aggressive, impulsive, low social skills, disliked, selfish types that don't flourish, That's who we're talking about, the coercive controllers. There's your model citizens, very socially competent, slow strategies versus fast, etc. And we have our very socially unskilled, withdrawn, anxious, peripheral, victimized children. Victimized. So can you imagine the little monkey rocking in the corner who gets bit by others because they're so socially incompetent? I want to draw my interventionist friends to these kids because they are a high-risk group. But here are our bi-strategics. They are skilled, they are aggressive, they are liked, they have high-quality friendships, meaning that they enjoy intimacy and fun within their friendships. In adolescence, they enjoy the highest level of best friend nominations. So we know that these kids exist, to draw on a cliche. This is from Mean Girls. But what we haven't had before is a theoretical perspective that could address them, because they are supposed to be repellent and ostracized. So this is just a shout out to what was happening yesterday. Just real quick, this is AJ, what I came up with. When AJ was talking about risk and being variance in outcomes, plasticity and malleability, we have these two groups that are similar in terms of some behavioral characteristics and dissimilar in others. And we have this group experiencing our losses, but this group experiencing the gains. And what AJ said was there's no a priori reason to avoid taking risks. That evolution sees risks as neutral, and that the mental health model emphasizes unduly the costs. Because as we see, actually, we have kids engaging in high-risk behavior, but they're enjoying quite a few gains. And this is an exception to what he also mentioned, that harm to others is associated with harm to self. This is not true in the bi-strategics, or at least it doesn't appear to be. So, are bi-strategics socially competent? Well, maybe they are. If you define social competence, like many of my colleagues have for a very long time, in terms of effective in interactions and successfully balancing the goals of self and other. Apparently, while they're busily achieving their goals supremely, they are not unduly thwarting our goals, because we just gravitate towards them. And in fact, they might even be pushing our goals ahead, in that they might be serving the group very well. I don't know what this world would be like without bi-strategics. And this is what we mean, again, by evolution is neutral toward risk. And so I'm going to take his advice as an evolutionist, and I'm going to try to be neutral towards risk. And as another interesting perspective that maybe our clinical colleagues here know is the self-determination theory by Ed Dietze and Rich Ryan, University of Rochester. They talk about 3 foundational human needs. Needs for autonomy, owning your own behavior. Needs for relatedness, forging connections to others. And need for competence, being effective in the material world. If I muse on these needs and think about my types, only the bi-strategics are enjoying the fulfillment of these needs, because it's only the bi-strategics that are purely autonomous. Everybody else at some time has to give up autonomy to the will of a bi-strategic. They're meeting their relatedness needs, and they're certainly meeting their competence needs. And Dietze and Ryan say that greater need satisfaction is associated with optimal functioning. So am I saying that bullies are socially competent? No, I'm not saying that. And at this point, there's a warning. Beware the jingle fallacy. This is something that has been talked about for the bulk of the 20th century in terms of approaches to personality, is that we have tended to be sloppy with our words, and we need to become more intimate with their meanings, because summary labels quickly will control, often in unrecognized ways, the way we think. And that's just a fancy way of saying that there are 2 different constructs that are labeled identically in the literature. Aggression is not bullying. And in a recent reviewer, aggression does not equal bullying. Bullying is always aggression, but aggression is not always bullying. And a quick review of the literature in the bullying domain will show that people are using these words interchangeably, and I think that could be to our peril. So, taking my cue from yesterday, 3 simple RCT, resource control theory truths, that I'm going to even get on a limb and say these are value added. The fundamental concept in social science is power, in the same sense that energy is a fundamental concept in physics. The laws of social dynamics are laws which can only be stated in terms of power. Bertrand Russell. Prosociality is ultimately instrumental. It is an awesome competitive strategy. I highly recommend it. Aggression can be effective and competently employed as part of a mixed strategy across the lifespan. And here's a piece of advice. Let's set Rousseau aside, because Rousseau talked about this natural unfolding of children, that if they were unperturbed, they would be moral and good. And I think that we as developmentalists have kind of internalized this, that aggression is somehow born out of toxic environments. And if we can get rid of the toxicity, we can get rid of aggression. I'm not sure I'm ready to buy onto that. But I want to end with one complex ambiguity, rather than a simple truth, that a mixed strategy with high levels of aggression may be the path to social competence and optimal need fulfillment. Thank you. Are you going to moderate, or do I?
I want to ask a question. I don't want to moderate. But I will. Jay?
I'm just curious, you defined your bistrategic kind of artificially top third of both distributions. Another way to do this would be like a latent class analysis, where you just saw what went together and didn't a priori define it. And I'm wondering exactly what in natural groups, what percentage are going to be bistrategic? Are we talking really here about the exceptional, rare, dominant leader? That's the first question.
No.
No, okay. The second is, what about the distinction between, and I think this is lost in our field, being aggressive and being assertive?
Can I answer the first set of questions before I go to the second? If you can remind me what your second one was, because that's just...
Okay. I think that answered my first.
This is arbitrary. This is an arbitrary distinction, right? It's like, wow, that's so arbitrary. Why are you doing that? And that just goes to show, I think, how strong the theory is. Because when you make arbitrary cutoffs, you incorporate a good deal of unreliability. And what does unreliability do? It washes relationships away. And so when we do latent class analyses, we have not only verified that these groups do exist, but the relationships accentuate. So actually my approach here is very conservative, so maybe there will be fewer bistrategics, but at the same time, no, I do not think I'm talking about the exceptional leader. I think exceptional leaders, that exceptional leader is a bistrategic, but I think there are many of us.
Okay, I wasn't suggesting that there's only going to be one bistrategic. I was just trying to get a sense of how many, in a group, how many bistrategics.
Plenty.
Could everybody be bistrategic?
No.
In a select group?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, yeah, that's
There's a
my
frequency.
question.
Are you talking about in
dependency.
human populations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, because social dominance is always relative. Always relative. You have to have winners. You have to have losers.
What I'm trying to get to here is an estimate of the proportion that one can expect of bistrategics as naturally occurring.
I have it about 1/10 of my
Okay,
arbitrary
okay.
selections, and it goes lower when we use cluster analyses.
That's my question.
But I am not going to go so far to say I am talking about psychopaths that happen in 3 or 4%. But I would still say between 8 and 10% of the population.
Okay.
That's my best guess.
That's my question.
Yeah,
That's-
yeah.
that's-
So I think the point that I want to make is that cooperation and selfishness is a vulgar oversimplification of what social groups have to be. And if you look at organisms, for example, they are, and non-human social groups, there's a lot of processes which go into the creation of an organism, for example, which if you look at them, they look competitive and they look aggressive and they look predatory. In development, there's cells eating other cells and there's competition and so on. And so a human group, when it becomes organized, aggression is a positive force, for example, in terms of moral aggression, in order to keep things coordinated, and you need a social control system, all of which might look like aggression. So I think that that's just one point to make, that if we look to see how a social group is organized, it's not just like everyone's Mr. Rogers or should be. So in that sense, if you want to say, how should a group be organized, back to Jay's point and your point, could everyone be bistrategic? No, that wouldn't be right. So we need some differentiation, a point that Carol made in her talk. And then that differentiation provides a sort of a framework in which people get channeled and in which riskiness can be an asset or not. So I think thinking of groups as differentiated units in which cooperation and competition and aggression and so on can all play positive roles, I think is an important thing to go beyond this one-dimensional altruism selfishness. Go ahead, and then Bruce.
Okay. One thing I took away from yesterday was, as a clinician working with adolescents, I focused entirely on risks and risk avoidance, and was looking precisely at impulsivity, poor impulse control, poor decision making, invulnerability, as was discussed yesterday, rather than what's in it for the kid. This kind of takes it to the next level. Would those biostrategics be engaging in more of what I consider high-risk adolescent behaviors?
I don't think so. I don't think these are the kids that are going to come to your attention. These aren't the kids who are disruptive
Right.
and engaging in fire starting, et cetera.
But what about, okay, not come to my attention at juvenile detention, but what about sex? I mean, engaging in high-risk activities, not coming to my attention, not getting busted. Not
I
getting
don't think
caught.
so. These kids are not high on impulsivity. They're highly regulated. They're highly instrumental in their aggression, and they don't tend to be self-destructive. Where they self-destruct, and we've all had kids like this in our lab, is when they push their manipulativeness of us just a little too far, and then they have to learn in the next context to keep that under control. But these are executive skills. And so these aren't the kids who are going to come to the attention, I think, of school psychologists at all. Those are going to be the coercive controllers, and I want to make a plug for my non-controllers too, because they are non-aggressive and incredibly socially incompetent, and they really need your attention. And what other clinicians, if I add, have asked me, should we be teaching these kids how to be biostrategics?
In a way.
Yeah.
You go ahead and answer that. I'm not going to as a clinician.
Bruce,
I don't know.
Yeah. First off, thank you. I really like your work. It's really helped me understand more about power relationships in kids and think about it in a more complex way. And I wonder, it's a very rich description, and I wonder, do you have a message for policymakers or prevention people? Is there a message from this work about policy or prevention around kids?
I think that message would be is let's be honest about aggression and how we actually as a social group feel about it. Is we are ambivalent about it. We know that some forms of aggression are absolutely socially competent and functional. And those aren't the forms of aggression that really concern us. It's the things that were coming up yesterday. The fast strategy, early sex, etc. So not all aggression is bad. But on the flip side, all aggression has a victim. But I don't think these biostrategics are the bullies who are victimizing. That weak one. They're too smart for that. They're too instrumental. What purpose is that going to serve them? They're too busy wondering how they're going to manipulate like-ranked individuals than worrying about the people on the bottom.
Let's have two more and then keep things rolling. We'll have three more. Dennis, hold on a second. Jerry, Jay, Dennis.
Did you look at any other characteristics of the biostrategic children, such as their aptitudes or their creativity or their imagination or any other thing that might be of insight?
Yes. Yes, aptitude, creativity, no. So yes, no, no. But here are the things. They are average on school achievement. They are not super smart. They are just a bit above average. Our super smart kids are the pro-social controllers. Big surprise. They're huge on regulation. Biostrategics are high on extroversion, high on openness to experience, average on conscientiousness, average on neuroticism, if I recall. So they have a fairly healthy personality profile, actually.
I'm wondering here about, you're talking about victims as, are we dealing with assertiveness or aggressiveness? And I make a distinction here that aggressiveness is an attempt to get my way by hurting you. Assertiveness is an attempt to get my way by asserting my rights, my privileges, my status, my desires. One yields a victim, the other yields a consequence. And I'm just wondering, are these biostrategics truly, are they punching, are they kicking, are they hitting, or are they saying, we're going to do it my way with, a little firmer voice, which casts a dominant spell?
Both. And I am very much aware of the jingle fallacy, and I try not to commit it. And so I don't conflate aggression with assertion. So aggression are straight up acts of aggression of what we're measuring. Do these kids hit, kick, and punch others? Are items assessing aggression? Are items assessing aggression?
Okay.
So, and I do have other factors that emerge that are self-assertion, and they do look different. So again, if we were to conflate, we would hear the jingle of the assertion aggression
But are these kids, therefore, the biostrategics, also being more assertive?
Yes, they're also more assertive, but they're also some of the most aggressive kids on the schoolyard, both in their self-report and peer report.
Dennis, and then, we should go on. It's up to us. Do you want to let the conversation go on a little bit more? Dennis is next,
I
then
just
Stephen.
want to quickly know if it looks the same way in adolescence, because we've been talking
I
about.
think maybe we can take one more question. I mean, we have a whole long discussion period, just not to write into these two
And
talks.
Tony needs a, so one last, what's that?